I never thought my life could be ripped apart by my own blood. My name is Chloe, and growing up, I always believed family meant protection. But my younger brother, Ethan, turned those walls of safety into a prison of humiliation. For years, he mocked me, invaded my space, and laughed as our mother brushed it all aside with, "He's just being a boy." I swallowed the pain, thinking things would get better. But the day he framed me as a thief, planting our mother's jewelry in my drawer, and pointing the finger at me, was the day my world collapsed. My parents didn't ask questions. They just looked at me with disgust and told me to leave. That night, I stood on the sidewalk with nothing but a backpack and a heart full of betrayal. I thought I had lost everything until years later, karma handed me a $5 million truth. From the very beginning, the roles in our family were carved in stone. I was the quiet daughter who studied late into the night, kept her grades spotless, and did her chores without complaint. My younger brother Ethan, on the other hand, was the golden boy. He could crash Dad's car, fail half his classes, or disappear for days with his friends, and somehow Mom would find a way to defend him. "He's just young. Boys will be boys," she would say with a tired smile. The unfairness gnawed at me, but what hurt most wasn't Ethan's misbehavior, it was the way he turned it into ammunition against me. He delighted in embarrassing me. When I wore glasses for the first time, he shouted across the dinner table, "4 eyes reporting for duty," and our mother laughed instead of stopping him. When I wrote poems in my diary, Ethan stole it, read them out loud, and twisted my words into cruel jokes until I ran to my room, cheeks burning. Dad tried occasionally to intervene, but his voice was often drowned out by Mom's blind affection. One night after Ethan snuck into my room and scribbled all over my homework with a marker, I confronted him in the hallway. "Why do you hate me so much?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan smirked, leaned close, and whispered, "Because you're weak, and weak people don't belong here." Then he slammed the bathroom door in my face. Even at school, Ethan's shadow followed me. We went to the same middle school, and he made sure my classmates knew exactly how to torment me. If I dropped a book in the hallway, he'd shout, "Watch out, everyone. Here comes clumsy Chloe." Laughter would ripple through the crowd, and I would shrink smaller and smaller. Teachers noticed the tension but brushed it off as normal sibling rivalry. No one saw the bruises Ethan left on my spirit. I remember one particular night when Dad was working late and Mom was folding laundry in the living room. Ethan cornered me in the kitchen, grabbed my hair, and hissed, "You think you're better than me, don't you?" I pushed him away, my heart hammering, and shouted for Mom. She barely glanced up from the laundry basket and muttered, "Don't bother me with your fights. Work it out yourselves." I stood frozen, realizing then that in her eyes, I wasn't her daughter in need of protection. I was just an obstacle between her and her beloved son. As the years passed, the labels stuck. Ethan, the adored, untouchable child. Chloe, the scapegoat. I told myself I could endure it if I just kept my head down and worked hard. But deep inside, a small voice whispered the truth I didn't want to face. One day, his cruelty would escalate beyond childish pranks or sharp words. One day, Ethan would cross a line I could never come back from. And that day was coming faster than I realized. It happened on an ordinary Sunday evening, the kind that should have been safe and uneventful. Dad, Robert, had been polishing one of Mom's heirloom jewelry boxes. He left it on the dining table, open, while he stepped out to take a phone call. Inside lay a delicate gold bracelet, passed down from my grandmother, a piece my mother treasured more than anything. I noticed Ethan watching the box with a glint in his eyes, the kind of grin that always meant trouble. I tried to ignore it, retreating to my room with a textbook. A few minutes later, he barged in without knocking. "Hey, nerd, doing homework again?" he sneered, tossing one of my pencils on the floor. I didn't answer. I had learned silence was sometimes safer than words. But when he left, something in his swagger unsettled me. I checked my drawers an hour later, and my heart dropped into my stomach. There it was, the gold bracelet lying under my folded shirts. I gasped, realizing instantly what had happened. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. He wouldn't. But deep down, I knew Ethan would. Seconds later, his voice echoed down the hallway. Mom, Dad, Chloe took your bracelet. I saw her sneaking it into her drawer. My pulse thundered in my ears as heavy footsteps approached. Mom, Linda, stormed into my room with Dad trailing behind her. She yanked open my drawer, and when the bracelet gleamed in her hand, her face hardened. Chloe, how could you? Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't. I swear, I don't know how it got there. My voice cracked with desperation. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smirking like a cat who had just caught the mouse. I told you, he said smugly. She's been jealous of me for years. Jealous? I snapped, spinning toward him. You put it there, Ethan. You set me up, but my mother's glare silenced me. Enough lies. Stealing from your own family? This is shameful. She turned to my father. Robert, we can't allow this under our roof. Dad hesitated, his brow furrowed. Linda, maybe we should, but Mom cut him off, her voice icy. No, she needs to go, tonight. I felt the air leave my lungs. You're kicking me out for something I didn't do? Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Pack your things, Chloe. I can't look at you right now. Ethan's eyes glittered with victory. He whispered just loud enough for me to hear, Told you I'd win. That night, I stuffed a few clothes into a backpack, my hands trembling. I begged one last time. Please, Dad. Believe me, I didn't steal. Dad sighed, looking torn, but he didn't stop Mom as she pushed me toward the door. I'm sorry, Chloe, he murmured, almost under his breath. The door shut behind me with a final thud. Standing alone on the porch, clutching my backpack, I felt my entire world collapse. My brother had not only humiliated me, he had exiled me from my own family. And as I walked into the cold night, I knew one truth. Ethan had won the battle, but somewhere deep inside, I swore he would not win the war. The night air was cold, sharp enough to sting my cheeks as I stepped off the porch for the last time. I had no coat, no plan, just a backpack stuffed with clothes and a heart that felt heavier than any suitcase. Streetlights buzzed above me, throwing long shadows on the pavement. I remember thinking how strange it was. The world kept moving, cars hummed down the road, neighbors watched TV in their warm houses while mine had just collapsed behind me. I wandered aimlessly until I ended up at a bus stop, sitting on the hard metal bench, clutching my knees. The betrayal replayed in my mind like a broken record. Ethan's smirk, Mom's cold eyes, Dad's silence. Pack your things, Chloe. Her words echoed in my head. I had been erased from my own family in less than an hour. My phone buzzed, but it wasn't my parents, it never was. It was Rachel, my childhood friend. She noticed my voice shaking when I answered, and before I could explain, she cut me off. Where are you? Stay there. I'm coming. Rachel pulled up 20 minutes later, her little blue sedan screeching to the curb. She jumped out, wrapped me in a coat, and whispered, You're safe now. I broke down, sobbing into her shoulder. She didn't ask for details, not right away. She just drove me back to her small apartment and let me curl up on her couch. The next morning, I told her everything. Her face twisted with anger. They kicked you out? Over Ethan's lie? Chloe, that's insane. I begged them to believe me, I whispered, staring at my hands. But it didn't matter. Mom only saw what she wanted. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then you'll build a new family, out here, with people who actually value you. Those words planted the first fragile seed of hope inside me. But survival was far from easy. I picked up a job at a downtown cafe, working long hours after classes, just to scrape by. The smell of burnt espresso and dish soap clung to my clothes, but the paycheck meant food, rent, and maybe a textbook or two. I applied for every scholarship I could find, pouring my heart into essays that spoke of resilience, of climbing out of shadows. And little by little, doors began to open. Still, nights were the hardest. Birthdays passed with no phone calls, Thanksgiving dinners with no invitation, Christmas mornings where I stared at the ceiling instead of unwrapping gifts. Sometimes I'd scroll through social media and see family photos, Mom smiling proudly beside Ethan, Dad in the background, arms crossed but still there, no empty chair for me, No trace I'd ever existed. Each picture stabbed me, but I forced myself to look. It was fuel. I whispered to myself, they may have thrown me out, but they will not break me. And as the months turned into years, that promise became my anchor. What I didn't know then was that the pain of being cast aside would become the very fire that forged me into someone stronger than Ethan or anyone else in my family had ever imagined. Life after exile was brutal, but it also taught me one lesson I could never forget. Nobody was going to save me but myself. I threw everything into my studies, clutching at the one weapon Ethan couldn't steal: my determination. Days bled into nights at the university library. I lived on cheap instant noodles and dollar store coffee, but when the dean announced I had earned a full scholarship, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Rachel clapped the loudest at the ceremony. My own parents weren't there. I chose business as my major. Numbers didn't lie the way people did. While Ethan partied his way through life, I sat through lectures and internships, learning how companies rose and fell, how money flowed like currents in a river. I wanted control, the kind that couldn't be ripped away with a single accusation. Work became my identity. By junior year, I was running a small tutoring service for other students. By senior year, I had saved enough to rent my own tiny apartment. The walls were bare, but it was mine, every inch, earned with sweat and sleepless nights. It was around that time that my father reached out. One rainy evening, I opened my inbox to see an email from him. Just 5 words. I've been watching you, Chloe. I almost deleted it, convinced it was some cruel trick, but curiosity won. When I opened it fully, the message continued. I'm proud of you. More than you know. I stared at the screen for hours. Dad Robert, the man who had stood silent the night I was thrown out, was finally admitting something. A fracture of validation after years of emptiness. I didn't reply right away. Part of me still burned with anger, but his words stayed with me. Graduation came with honors, and with it, my first real job at a financial firm. The hours were long, the office cold, but I thrived. I climbed ranks quickly, turning every "you can't" into "I just did." Eventually, I gathered the courage to launch my own small consultancy. It wasn't glamorous, but the contracts trickled in, and for the first time, I felt steady ground beneath my feet. Love entered my life briefly, too. I met Daniel, a kind, soft-spoken engineer, at a networking event. He made me laugh, something I had forgotten how to do. Yet every time he held my hand, a shadow crossed my mind. Ethan's smirk, my mother's rejection. Trust was a wound that hadn't healed. Still, there were moments when I believed I could be happy. Moments when I allowed myself to imagine a future built not on survival, but on choice. And then, one evening, a letter arrived from my father. His handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. One day, everything I worked for will be yours, he wrote. I clutched the letter, my throat tight. For the first time, I realized the tide was turning. The girl they had thrown away was rising brick by brick, scar by scar, into someone they could never ignore again. The letter from my father became a prophecy sooner than I expected. A year after I launched my consultancy, my phone rang with the news. Dad was gone. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. I remember standing in my office, the city skyline behind me, the world moving on while mine froze. Despite all the bitterness, he had been the only one who had reached out, the only parent who whispered he was proud. Tears spilled before I could stop them. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm cloud. I sat in the oak-paneled office of my father's lawyer, hands trembling in my lap. Mom was already there, lips pursed, eyes sharp as knives. Beside her sat Ethan, lounging in the chair like he owned the room. He hadn't changed, arrogant, smug, radiating the same entitlement that had destroyed me years ago. The lawyer cleared his throat. Robert Mitchell's last will and testament, he began, unfolding the pages. My pulse pounded so hard I barely heard the legal jargon. Then came the words that split the room in two. To my daughter, Chloe Mitchell, I leave the remainder of my estate, including financial assets, property, and holdings, valued at $5 million. My breath caught. $5 million. My father's lifetime of work all entrusted to me. The lawyer continued. To my son, Ethan Mitchell, I leave the sum of $1. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Ethan's face turned scarlet. He bolted upright. What? This is a joke, he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Papers fluttered. It's not a joke, the lawyer said firmly. Your father was clear. He amended this will personally, 3 months before his death. I sat frozen, tears streaming silently. Vindication had never felt so heavy. For years, I had carried the label of thief, liar, disappointment. Now my father had wiped it clean with one final stroke of his pen. Mom spun on me, her voice shrill. You manipulated him. You poisoned him against his own son. I looked at her, voice shaking but steady. No, Mom. Dad finally saw the truth. He saw what Ethan really islanded. Ethan lunged across the table, pointing a finger at me. You think you've won? You think this money makes you better than me? This isn't over, Chloe. Not by a long shot. The lawyer intervened, his calm voice slicing through the chaos. Mr. Mitchell, you will control your temper. Your father's wishes are legally binding. Ethan shoved his chair back so violently it toppled over. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass panes. Mom followed, muttering curses under her breath, leaving me alone with the lawyer. I sat there, shaking, the weight of $5 million pressing down on my shoulders. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was grief and exhaustion. My father's absence hurt more than Ethan's rage, or my mother's venom. Still, beneath the sorrow, a flame burned bright. For the first time, justice was mine. It had been 3 months since the will reading, and I was still adjusting to the strange weight of my inheritance. $5 million. It felt surreal, both empowering and suffocating. I had moved into a new townhouse, one with tall windows and a balcony that caught the morning sun. Every corner whispered of independence. Yet, beneath the polished floors and expensive furniture, the echo of my father's absence lingered. One rainy evening, as thunder cracked over the rooftops, there was a knock on my door, a frantic, uneven pounding. My chest tightened. I opened it slowly and there he was. Ethan. He looked nothing like the golden boy my mother had adored. His hair was greasy, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes ringed with shadows. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the untouchable brother who had ruined me, but as something smaller, desperate, broken. Chloe, he croaked, voice raw. Please, I need your help. I gripped the doorknob so tightly my knuckles whitened. Images flashed through my mind, the bracelet in my drawer, Mom's cold eyes, the night I stood in the dark with nothing but a backpack. My heart hardened. You? I said quietly. Asking me for help? His lips trembled. I've got nothing. Mom won't answer my calls. She blames me for Dad's will. Karen, my girlfriend, she left. I can't pay my rent. I can't even afford food half the time. The bitterness surged. Do you remember when I begged them to believe me? When I swore I didn't steal that bracelet, and you just stood there smirking? You destroyed me, Ethan. You watched them throw me out. He flinched but tried to smile weakly. I was a kid. I didn't understand. You were 17, I snapped, my voice rising. Old enough to know exactly what you were doing. For a moment, the mask slipped. His face crumpled, and tears filled his eyes. I was jealous, he whispered. You were always so perfect. And I... Perfect? I laughed bitterly. I was their scapegoat, Ethan. You were the golden one. Don't twist this. He sank to his knees right there on my porch, rain drenching his shirt. Please, Chloe, just talk to Mom. Get her to forgive me. Or lend me something. Anything. I'll pay you back. I swear. I stared down at him, the once proud brother reduced to a shivering figure in the storm. A part of me, small and aching, felt pity. But another part remembered every scar he left on me. You want forgiveness? I said, my voice steady. Ask the girl you framed as a thief. Ask the child you exiled from her home. But I'm not her anymore. I'm done carrying your sins. His tears mixed with the rain as I stepped back inside. The door shut with a quiet click, final and cold. For the first time, Ethan was the one left alone in the dark. I thought shutting the door that night would end it, but Ethan was never one to accept silence. A week later, he came back. This time, he didn't knock. He pounded his fists against the door so hard the picture frames on my wall rattled. "Chloe, open up. We need to talk." I hesitated, anger and dread swirling in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore him, but another part, the same stubborn flame that had carried me through years of exile, refused to hide. I unlocked the door. Ethan stood there, drenched in sweat despite the cool evening air. His eyes were bloodshot, wild. "You can't just erase me. We're family." I crossed my arms. "Family? You erased me the night you framed me. You chose your victory over your sister." His jaw clenched. I was stupid. I was angry. "But Dad's gone now, and Mom won't even look at me. You're all I have left." Hearing him say it, "You're all I have left," sent a twisted jolt through me. For years, I had been the one with nothing, cast aside while he basked in affection. Now the tables had turned. He dropped to his knees on my porch, just as he had before. But this time he pressed his forehead to the ground. "Please, Chloe, I'll do anything. Just don't shut me out." I stared at him, rain beginning to drizzle again, soaking his shirt. My heart pounded with a mix of pity and fury. "Do you remember the night I begged Mom to believe me?" I said softly. I stood in that hallway, tears streaming down my face, swearing I didn't steal. And you smirked. You enjoyed watching me burn. Ethan's lips trembled. I was wrong. I crouched down, my voice low and sharp. "Wrong? Wrong is forgetting someone's birthday. Wrong is breaking a vase. What you did was betrayal. You stole my family from me. You left me in the dark, alone, with nothing." He tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. His voice cracked. "I'm not that person anymore. I can change. Just give me a chance." The sight of him so broken, so desperate might have swayed me once. But not now. Not after everything. I stood tall, towering over him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the weak sister. "You want redemption?" I said. "Then find it on your own. I won't be your savior. I won't carry the weight of your sins. This is your hell, Ethan, and you built it yourself." His face twisted in anguish as I stepped back inside. His fists slammed against the door one last time. "You'll regret this, Chloe," he shouted, voice raw with rage. But I didn't regret it. Not then, not ever. I leaned against the closed door, tears streaming, my chest heaving. Justice wasn't sweet, it was bitter, painful, messy, yet it was justice all the same. That night, for the first time, I felt the chains Ethan had wrapped around my life finally shatter. The night of our final confrontation left me shaking, but when morning came, the air felt lighter, as though a storm had passed. For years, Ethan had haunted me like a shadow that refused to let go. Now, that shadow was outside my door, locked out where it belonged. Life moved forward. With the inheritance, I made choices I never thought possible. I invested part of it into expanding my consultancy, hiring a small team who believed in my vision. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was leading. Clients respected me, colleagues sought my advice, and my voice finally carried weight. But wealth alone didn't heal wounds. I carried scars too deep for money to touch. That's why I created a scholarship fund in my father's name, one dedicated to students estranged from their families, kids who had been cast aside just like I was. When I signed the first approval letter, I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was as if I had taken all my pain and turned it into a weapon for good. As for Mom, she tried to reach out once. A letter, neat cursive on cream paper. "Ethan needs us. He's lost. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer. I couldn't bring myself to reply. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Ethan eventually disappeared from my daily life. Rumors floated in through cousins and distant relatives he'd bounced between jobs, fallen into debt, burned bridges faster than he could build them. At one point, someone mentioned he was living in a rundown apartment on the edge of town. I didn't go see him. I didn't need to. His downfall wasn't my victory, it was his own doing. One evening, I stood on the balcony of my townhouse, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Ethan or Mom, or even the night I was thrown out with nothing but a backpack. Instead, I thought about Rachel's kindness, about my father's last letter, about the life I was building on my own terms. I whispered to myself, I was once the scapegoat, but now I'm my own savior. The words settled over me like a vow. Justice hadn't come in the way I imagined. It wasn't dramatic vengeance, or a perfect Hollywood ending. It was quieter, steadier. It was the knowledge that I had risen above the ashes, that no matter what Ethan or anyone else did, they couldn't erase me. As the city lights flickered on below, I closed my eyes and let the cool evening breeze wash over me. The past was still there, etched into my bones. But so was the future, and this time, it belonged entirely to me.